Hey everybody, and welcome to the second video from Chapter 9. Today we're going to finish our discussion on the structure of the financial system by talking about funding sources, specifically on the funding of non-corporate firms and the funding of corporations, and then compare and contrast them with a couple conclusions. So first we're going to take a look at the funding of non-corporate firms. As you can see, by far the largest funding source are mortgages. And when you look at the y-axis, we're talking $4,000 billion or $4 trillion worth of mortgages exist in the US market right now. Comparatively, bank loans, excluding mortgages, we're going to get into those in the next chapter, make up about $1.5 trillion. So, massive difference there. But really, this shows yet another example of why the 2007 recession was so massive, was because of the source of debt in non-corporate firms being primarily mortgages. Now, we can contrast that with corporate firms, which first we can see on the left the same graph, except you can see that stocks make up $30 trillion and bonds make up about $8 trillion. So a bit of a different structure there, obviously, because corporations are actually allowed to issue stock. But this shows just how massive the stock market is when you consider that this is the primary vehicle of funding for corporate firms. So without the stock market, bonds and loans would have to go way up, and most likely the US mobility and financial growth would drop dramatically. So if we think back to the last video on that graph that shows the financial institution and financial institution sizes, then compared to real GDP per capita, this right here is the big explanation, is because the financial institutions enable stock issuance, which raises funding for corporations to invest back in their company. However, when we look at the changes, we can see that it is decreasing actually the net new stock issuance. Since 2017, the amount of new stock issued amounts to about negative $400 billion, which means that stocks have actually on the net been bought back. Now, there's a lot of discussion that you may have heard about why companies may buy back stock, and one of the big reasons is, yes, to free up profits to pay executive bonuses. However, there are less pessimistic and more actually important reasons to doing so. The first one is to reduce its cost of capital. So if a company is starting to stabilize itself, if it doesn't need to continue rapid growth, it may buy back some of its stock so that it can reduce its cost of capital through such things as loans. Additionally, it may consolidate ownership so that they have more control over the company. Once again, this is more thinking in the idea that they have the cash that they need, and now they need to just consolidate and control where the company is going. It's also not very pleasant to have your company's value being tied to the stock market when you think about things like recessions or even like what happened with GameStop. So there are some really good reasons, especially at the end of a long growth period like the 2017 to 2019 period, which followed a decade of stock market growth. But what we can take away is that companies are shifting to bond issuance instead of stock in since 2017. So, a couple conclusions, especially when comparing these two slides. First, that loans from financial intermediaries are the most important source of funds for small to medium-sized firms and households, specifically when we look at mortgages. Additionally, the stock market, while massive, is decreasing in importance when we look at sources of external funds for corporations. Also, finally, debt contracts, when we look at that second to last slide, they usually require collateral or restricted covenants meaning that we may actually be shifting to a bit more of a stable system. And then again, as I mentioned before, mortgages always give collateral in the form of the house. So the fact that the US financial system is shifting to external funding to be coming from a little bit more debt instead of equity may actually be a bit of a good thing when you think about the fact that it mitigates the probability of a propagating effect if a company goes bankrupt. But with that being said, short and sweet chapter, you're now ready for the chapter 9 quiz.